Every morning, smoke rose from the hillside, thin, gray, steady against the winter sky. There was no cabin there, no shack, no sod house, no chimney anyone could point to. Just smoke, rising from frozen ground, as if the earth itself was breathing. Councilman Amos Reed had searched that hillside 3 times. He had ridden across it, walked it, dug into it with his own hands. He checked every ridge, every dip, every patch of disturbed soil. Nothing. No structure, no door, no sign of life. And yet, the smoke kept rising. On the 3rd search, he stood at the top of the slope, looked out across the white prairie, and made his conclusion. The girl is dead. She froze out here weeks ago. The smoke, it's nothing. Gas, maybe. Something natural. He turned his horse back toward town, satisfied, certain. What Amos Reed did not know was that Ingrid Halverson was 15 feet beneath his boots, lying in her bed, warm, fed, alive. She could hear him walking above her, each step dull and heavy through the packed earth. He had stood there, declaring her dead, while she listened, and said nothing. Because that was the point. Ingrid Halverson was not supposed to be found. Not by the town. Not by the council. Not by the man who had watched her walk away and said nothing. She had been 17 when they decided she no longer belonged. Her father, Johann Halverson, had died in early autumn. A good man, careful, quiet, the kind of man who prepared for winter before the first leaf fell. A horse had spooked in the pasture, a sudden movement, a broken line, a fall. And just like that, everything changed. 3 days after the funeral, Ingrid stood in the doorway of the house she had grown up in, still wearing black, still hearing her father's voice in every room. Across from her stood Marta Halverson, her stepmother, hands folded, face calm, eyes cold. "This land is mine now," Marta said. "The law is clear." Ingrid did not argue. She knew the law. She also knew the truth behind it. "You can stay if you make yourself useful," Marta added. A pause, just long enough. "Or you can leave." There are moments when a life splits in two, before and after. Ingrid looked past her, into the house, the table her father had built, the stove he had repaired every winter, the walls he had sealed against the wind. None of it belonged to her anymore. So she stepped outside. No suitcase, no wagon, no place waiting for her. Just open land, and a sky that did not care. The town of Red Hollow watched her go, from doorways, from wagons, from behind windows. No one stopped her. No one offered help. And Councilman Amos Reed stood with the others, arms folded, voice loud enough to carry. "That's what happens," he said, "when a girl doesn't learn her place. A decent one would have stayed, made herself useful." The words followed her farther than the town did, out past the last fence, past the last barn, into open prairie where nothing broke the wind. That night she did not sleep. The ground was too cold, the air too sharp, the silence too wide. But she did not turn back, because Ingrid Halverson knew something the town did not. She knew the land. She knew where the ground held heat, where the wind could not reach, where a person could disappear and still live. And by the time the first real snow fell, the girl they had cast out, the girl they said would never survive, was already building a home that none of them would ever be able to find. The first night nearly broke her. The prairie does not forgive uncertainty. It does not wait for you to decide what to do next. When the sun goes down, it takes the heat with it. Ingrid had no fire, no shelter, no walls to stop the wind that came rolling across the open land. She curled herself behind a low rise in the earth, pulling her coat tight, trying to make herself smaller than the cold. It was not enough. By morning, her hands were stiff, her thoughts slower. Another night like that, and she would not survive. So she stood, turned away from town, and walked. There was only one place she could go. 5 miles north, beyond a stretch of broken grassland, past a creek that cut through the soil like a scar, lived a man most people in Red Hollow had forgotten. Lars Bjornsson. He had come from Norway long before the town existed, built his homestead into the land itself, lived quietly, spoke rarely, and knew things the town had never cared to learn. When Ingrid reached his place, the sun was already low. Lars was outside, splitting wood slowly, methodically, like a man who had learned to make every movement count. He looked up once, saw her, saw nothing. Ingrid stepped closer, her voice steady, even though her body was not. "I need to learn how to build into the earth." No explanation, no pleading. Lars studied her, not her clothes, not her face, her posture, her eyes, the way she stood despite the cold. Then he nodded once. "There's a hill," he said, "south-facing, edge of your father's old claim. Your stepmother won't know it's there." He set the axe aside. "If you build it right, no one will." They began the next morning. The hill was nothing special to anyone passing by, just a rise in the land, covered in dry grass, exposed to the sun. But that was the point. South-facing slopes caught winter light, held what little warmth the sun gave, and, more importantly, the earth beneath them stayed steady. 55 degrees, Lars said. Winter or summer. The ground remembers. They marked the entrance first, not where it was easy, where it was invisible, behind a natural fold in the hill, out of sight from every direction that mattered. Then they dug. Not wide at first, not deep, just enough to break the surface. But the earth fought back. Hard clay, packed tight from years of wind and rain. Each shovel strike sending a dull shock through her arms. Ingrid dug anyway, hour after hour. Lars did not help much with the labor. His hands were too worn, too stiff. But his voice never stopped. Angle the floor. Water runs downhill. Moisture kills faster than cold. Pack the walls tight. No air gaps. No loose soil. Every instruction mattered, because mistakes underground did not give second chances. By the third day, the outline of a room had begun to take shape. 12 feet across, then deeper. 15, 18, 20. The ceiling was left thick, heavy, supported by the earth itself. Not a structure built above ground, but a space carved out from within it. Hidden, protected. They lined the walls with cut sod blocks, packed tight, layer over layer. Grass roots binding the soil together, holding it firm. At night, Ingrid slept near the entrance, wrapped in blankets Lars had given her. The air inside the half-finished space was already different. Not warm, but not biting. The wind could not reach her there, and that alone changed everything. They worked through October, day after day. Ingrid hauling dirt out by hand, spreading it across the hillside in thin layers so no one would notice how much had been moved. By the second week, Lars showed her the chimney. Not a tall stack, not something visible from a distance, just a narrow pipe, buried low, disguised with stone. From above, it would look like nothing. "The smoke will give you away," Ingrid said. Lars shook his head. "Only if they know where to look." "They won't." By the time the first frost settled into the ground, the shape of the dugout was complete. Walls firm, entrance hidden, roof thick enough to walk on without ever knowing what lay beneath. And every morning after that, a thin line of smoke began to rise from the hillside. Seen from town, whispered about, laughed at, but never understood. Because while they stood above it, searching, guessing, arguing about what it could be, Ingrid Halvorsen was below. building something they did not yet realize they would one day depend on to stay alive. By the time winter settled over Red Hollow, Ingrid Halvorsen had disappeared. Not vanished, not gone, hidden. From the road, the hillside looked unchanged. Just frozen grass, wind-swept snow, nothing that suggested a human life beneath it. And yet, every morning, the smoke rose. Thin, steady, unmistakable. People began to notice, at first quietly, then with curiosity, then with something closer to unease. Because smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. And warmth meant someone was out there, living. The problem was, no one could find where. The first search party rode out in early November, led by Councilman Amos Reed. He did not like loose ends, did not like unanswered questions, and he did not like being wrong. They approached the hill from the east, a clean line, open view. From that angle, there was nothing to see. No door, no chimney, no disturbance in the land that looked deliberate. "Spread out," Reed ordered. They dismounted, walked the slope, boots crunching through frost and thin snow. One man kicked at the ground, another bent low, studying the grass. They found where soil had been moved, slightly darker patches, subtle changes in texture. "Someone's been digging," one of them said. Reed nodded. Of course they had. He was close. Closer than he knew. 10 feet from the entrance, standing above the roof. But Ingrid had built it right. The doorway sat behind a natural fold in the hill, invisible unless you approached from a single narrow angle. And no one ever did. The chimney was worse. A thin pipe, buried low, covered with scattered stone. It looked like part of the hillside itself. The smoke rose, but it did not point. It drifted, spread, disappeared into the wind. They searched for an hour, then 2, walking back and forth across the slope, talking louder as frustration grew. "She's not here. She was here. She couldn't have gone far." Reed stood still, eyes fixed on the ground, jaw tight. "She's here," he said quietly. "I know she is." But knowing and finding were not the same thing. They rode back empty-handed. And the next morning, the smoke rose again. Thin, gray, unbothered. The second search was larger. More men, more time. They approached from the west this time, then the north. then circled the entire hill. Nothing. By the third search, the tone had changed. Not curiosity anymore. Irritation. "Maybe she left," one man said. "Maybe it's just the ground." Reed said nothing, because the smell was there. Faint, but real. Wood smoke. Something alive beneath a place that should have been empty. It bothered him, more than it should have, because it meant someone had done something he did not understand. Back in town, the story spread. At the mercantile, at the well, in the corners of quiet conversations. "The Lindell girl's out there, living in a hole, like an animal." Laughter followed. It always did, because laughter made it easier. Easier than admitting they didn't know how she was surviving. They gave it a name. The smoke from nowhere. And once it had a name, it became a joke. Maybe it's a ghost. Maybe the ground's on fire. Maybe Reed just can't find what's right under his feet. That one got the biggest laugh. Everyone laughed. Except Reed. Because he knew something the others didn't. The girl had no supplies when she left. No wagon. No shelter. And yet, she was still there. Still burning wood. Still eating. Still living. Which meant one thing. She had built something. Something good enough that no one could find it. And that thought stayed with him. Through November. Through December. As the cold deepened. As the wind sharpened. As the town settled into the rhythm of surviving winter. Every morning, the smoke rose. And beneath it, hidden in packed earth and quiet darkness, Ingrid Halverson lived inside a space the wind could not reach, the cold could not steal, and no one could take away. By January, the dugout was complete. Walls tight, air still, temperature steady. A bed carved into one side, shelves lined with food, a stove that burned slow and efficient, and below it all, even deeper, a root cellar. Food stored in earth that never froze. While the town laughed at smoke they couldn't explain, Ingrid Halverson had already solved winter. They just didn't know it yet. Winter did not end the way they expected. It did not fade. It did not soften. It turned. February passed with strange signs. Days that felt almost warm, followed by nights that dropped without warning. The wind shifted directions, then shifted again. Animals grew restless. Cattle pressed together in tight groups. Dogs refused to wander far from the door. Old men watched the sky longer than usual and said less. But in Red Hollow, no one listened. "We've seen worse," they said. "We'll get through it." They trusted their houses, their stoves, their habits. They trusted what had always worked. And that was their mistake. The storm came in March, not slowly, not with warning they could understand. One morning, the air was calm, almost gentle. By midday, the temperature dropped, hard, fast, 30 degrees in a matter of hours. By evening, the wind arrived. It did not blow. It roared. 50 miles per hour, then more. Snow did not fall. It flew, sideways, relentless. Within hours, the horizon disappeared. By nightfall, the town was gone, buried, not destroyed yet, but buried. Inside their homes, families did what they had always done. They fed the fire, again and again and again. Wood disappeared faster than it should. Doors froze shut, windows sealed with ice. Every time a door opened, heat vanished, gone in seconds. By the second day, fear had settled in. Not panic, not yet, but something heavier. Doubt. At the Marsh House, the fire never stopped burning. Still, the room never felt warm. Children slept in coats, their breath visible in the air. At the Hines place, the chimney clogged with packed snow. Smoke filled the room. They opened the door to clear it, and the storm nearly tore it from its hinges. Snow poured inside, like the outside had decided to come in. By the third day, things began to fail. A roof collapsed on the south side of town. Another building lost its door. Then another. Wood piles shrank. Food became harder to reach. Livestock froze where they stood. And still, the storm did not stop. Day 4. The temperature dropped further, 40 below, then worse. The wind did not weaken. It tightened. By then, people understood. This was not weather. This was survival. 17 people died in the first days, some in their homes, some outside, trying to reach wood, trying to reach help. There was no help. The town began to break, not all at once, one family at a time. And through it all, something strange remained, unchanged. On the 5th day, when the wind eased just enough to see beyond a few yards, Councilman Amos Reed stepped outside what remained of his home. The air cut through him instantly. The cold was no longer sharp. It was heavy. He looked out across the white, trying to understand what was left, what could still be saved. And then he saw it. A thin line of gray rising in the distance. The hillside, The smoke, still there, still rising, steady, unbroken, alive. Reed stared at it, his mind catching up, slowly, painfully. She's still out there. The words came out without meaning to. She's alive. Around him, people were dying. Homes were failing. Wood was gone. And the girl they had cast out, the girl they had laughed at, was still burning fire somewhere no one could find. Reed felt something shift inside him. Not pride, not anger. Something else. Realization. They had built against the wind, against the cold, against the storm, and they were losing. She had built beneath it. And she was still there, still warm, still alive. On the 8th day, when the storm finally broke just enough to move, Reed gathered what remained of the town. 21 people. Cold, hungry, exhausted. "We follow the smoke," he said, because now it was the only thing left that made sense. They moved at first light, if it could be called light. The sky was still gray, the air still bitter, the snow still deep enough to swallow a man to his waist. 21 people. What remained of Red Hollow? They walked in silence, no strength left for talking, no certainty left to argue. Only one direction. Toward the smoke. The journey should have taken less than an hour. It took nearly 3. Each step slow, heavy. The wind had carved the land into drifts and ridges that did not exist before. Nothing looked familiar. But the smoke never moved. It rose straight up, thin, steady, like a marker, like a signal. When they reached the hillside, there was nothing there. Just frozen grass, wind-cut snow, silence. Reed stopped, his breath shallow, his body shaking. "This is the place," he said. No one answered, because they had all seen it from a distance. And now, standing on top of it, there was nothing. Then, a voice. "You're standing too far left." Every head turned. Reed froze. The sound had come from the ground. "Step back," the voice said. Slowly. They did. One step, then another. Snow shifted. A line appeared where there had been none. A gap between rocks. Subtle, narrow, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. And then she was there. Ingrid Halverson, standing in the opening, framed by earth and shadow. Alive. For a moment, no one spoke, because she did not look like someone who had been surviving. She looked steady. Her cheeks held color. Her posture was straight. Her eyes clear, while theirs were hollow. Reed took a step forward, his voice catching in his throat. "We thought—" He stopped, because the words meant nothing now. Ingrid looked past him, at the others. Children wrapped in blankets, men barely standing, faces burned red by cold. She understood immediately. She had been expecting this. "There's room," she said. Simple, calm. No anger, no hesitation. "Come inside." One by one, they stepped forward, through the narrow entrance, down into the earth. And everything changed. The wind disappeared first, then the bite of the cold, then the shaking. Not all at once, but enough. The air was still, warm. Not hot, not heavy, just steady. Someone gasped. Another sat down immediately. A child began to cry, not from fear, from relief. Reed stood at the bottom of the ladder, turning slowly, taking it in. Stone and packed earth walls, shelves lined with food, a small stove, burning low, efficient, not fighting the cold, ignoring it. "What is the temperature?" he asked. Ingrid glanced at the thermometer. 55. Outside, it was nearly 50 below. A difference so large it did not feel real. "You've been living like this the whole winter?" he asked. She nodded. "The ground holds it. It doesn't change." Reed closed his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, from understanding. They had burned through their homes, their wood, their strength, fighting something they could not win. And she had stepped out of the fight entirely. For 2 weeks they stayed there, 21 people, sleeping in shifts, eating carefully, sharing space that had never been meant for so many. And still, it held. The warmth did not leave. The air did not turn. No one froze. When the relief wagons finally arrived, they did not find a town. They found ruins, collapsed roofs, empty homes, frozen silence, and one place where smoke still rose from nowhere. Later, when people asked how they survived, the answer was always the same. A girl, they said, was dead. Reed stood in front of what remained of Red Hollow, days after the storm. His voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "I was wrong," he said. Not to the crowd, to her. Ingrid did not answer. She did not need to, because the lesson had already been learned. Not in words, but in cold, in hunger, in the difference between those who prepared and those who only believed they were ready. Some stories end with revenge. This one didn't. It ended with something harder. A door that opened anyway. And a fire that kept burning, even for the people who never believed it would.